we want to begin by making one thing clear. If we want our students to develop thinking abilities, we would need to do two things. One, we need to change our syllabuses and the design of assessment, including final exams, entrance exams, aptitude tests, talent tests, and so on. Then we have to create learning materials, whether printed or digital, that aim at these thinking abilities. And then, only then, align the classroom teaching to these thinking abilities. Our existing curricula, syllabuses and exams and so on, are not oriented towards thinking abilities. They are focused on information recall and mechanical high-speed application, and these are not quite suitable for development of thinking abilities. We can't learn to swim by simply answering multiple choice questions on swimming or listening to learner lectures on swimming. You have to practice. And thinking is an ability just like swimming. Sarah, would you like to take over? Okay, Sarah seems to be disconnected. So,
am I connected now?
Okay, now you're connected. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So, sorry. So, in this webinar, what we hope to do is this. We will first go through a few examples of tasks that are designed to develop thinking abilities in mathematics, in the sciences, and the humanities. Now, when we look at the kinds of thinking that we find in mathematics and the physical sciences, the biological sciences, the human sciences, and humanities, we find that there are some thinking abilities that are distinctive to each of these groups of disciplines. But we also find that they all share certain ways of thinking. Okay? So what we're going to do is we try and spell out some of the distinctive properties, but emphasize the shared ones. We then go on to ask two questions, actually three questions. How can syllabuses, learning materials, pedagogical strategies, assessment, and so on be changed to be aligned to these thinking abilities, such that they support these thinking abilities? And empowered by these changes, what can teachers do in their classrooms to help their students develop these thinking abilities? You know, there's a third question, which is what perhaps most of you would be interested in, is important for you. If you want to develop your thinking abilities outside the school and college systems, what options do you have to develop them on your own? Okay. So we will let's move on to the questions that we have, the examples that we have. Yeah? All the examples happen to be in the form of questions, and these are questions. We picked questions because the questions themselves can serve either as learning tasks, because by engaging with such questions in the process of your learning, you would develop certain thinking abilities. And these questions can also serve as assessment tasks, because to answer such questions in tests and examinations and so on, you would need to use those same thinking abilities that you develop in the process of your learning. Okay? Now, what we will do is we will take these examples one at a time. We'll read out the question, and step back and take a look at the design of the question. And we will ask, about each question, we'll ask, when it appears in learning materials or in a classroom, that is, when it appears as a learning task, what thinking abilities does it aim to nurture? Okay? What are its learning outcomes? And if it appears as an assessment task, what abilities does it seek to probe into, try and unearth? Okay. So let's go to the first question. Is there air in this room? How do you know? Whether you say yes or no, how do you know it? Teacher, that's the question. Now, if this was a different kind of a session, we would be actually doing this. We will be trying to find an answer to the question in an interactive way. But given the webinar situation, let's just go straight on to what the implications of the question are. You want to take over?
Yeah, this might actually strike most people as a very strange question. Of course, all of us know in a certain sense that there is air in this room. So when somebody asks you, how do you know there is air in this room? That strikes you as very strange. But what we do in the classroom is we say, no, we don't believe there is air in this room. Convince us. And the students are initially quite perplexed, bewildered. And then they say something like this, okay, I'll convince you there is air in this room. Do this. And we do that. And say, see, that is air coming out of your mouth. And we will say, oh, I can accept that there is air coming out of the mouth, but that doesn't mean there is air in this room. So if I keep my mouth open, saliva comes out of my mouth, but that doesn't mean that there is saliva in this room. This argument is not good. And students take some time to get over the shock, and they say, okay, if there is no air in this room, we will not be able to breathe. Breathing requires air. So we say, what is breathing? So they say breathing is taking an air from outside and leaving it out, pushing it outside. And they say, but look, how can that be? Because we are questioning the very idea that there is air in this room, so you cannot define, you cannot presuppose that there is air in this room. So I'm going to say that breathing is simply an activity in which our chest expands and contracts. Air is not needed. And students would say, okay, let's try this one. You see the branches moving out, the branches of trees moving. That is because of strong air movement. And we would say, no, we don't believe that. The trees are moving on their own, just as, for example, a dog wags its tail. You don't need air for the dog to wag its tail. So every argument that students give, we give an alternative explanation. And it usually takes students about 20 minutes to half an hour, or sometimes even 45 minutes to come up with a good argument to establish that there is air in this room. What's going on here is this. We take it for granted that certain beliefs we take for granted, and we are questioning what is taken for granted. And this is an important aspect of scientific thinking. You cannot take things for granted, and you have to provide reasons for your beliefs, for your claims. And students are getting used to that behavior in exercise of this kind. They're also engaged in stating their arguments clearly, precisely. They are learning how to provide rational justification for this. This is not something that typically happens in class. So shall we move on to question 2?
Okay. So question 2 is, the ancient Greek philosopher Empedocles proposed a theory of vision which held that we see an object when a ray from our eye hits the object. What aspects of are explained satisfactorily by the theory? What does the theory say to explain? And what modification would you have to make to the theory to overcome the failure?
This is also something strange for students because they have taken it for granted that we see things because light rays from the object come and hit the eye. But this was not the case long ago. As the question indicates, during the ancient times, people thought that we are able to see because something from our eye goes and hits the object. This is not unusual because notice that if you close your eyes and you want to feel something in front of you, you extend your arm, and when your arm touches the object, you say, there is an object in front of you. Empedocles thought exactly the same way. Something from the eye goes and hits the object. That's when we see. So we ask the students, okay, why should I believe what the textbook says? Why can't I accept what the ancient authorities said, that we are able to see because light from our eye goes and hits the object? And once again, it takes some time for students to get around this problem. And they say, okay, let me convince you that this Empedocles theory doesn't work. Reason is this: if it is at night and I turn off the light, you are not able to see. So that means that light is needed, that light rays are needed, and the rays coming from the objects to the eye. And we say, yes, but there is a difference between a theory of vision, how we are able to see, and the theory of light. So Empedocles thought, of course, Empedocles knew that there is something that we call light, but he assumed that light is a substance, like some kind of water that fills the room. So when you turn on the light switch, the substance called light fills the room. And for the eye, for us to see something, again, the ray from the eye has to go and hit that object. And that is possible only if there is light in the room. So the modern theory of vision and the Empedocles theory of vision, they seem to be equally good. Why should I accept the modern theory? Why should I accept the textbook? And students have to struggle. It is not impossible for them to find an argument to choose the textbook theory, but they really have to think hard and come up with a good argument, and that's not trivial. And in doing this, choosing between competing scientific theories, they're learning how to do science, not simply memorize the words and sentences in the textbook. Let's take another example.
So going to the next question. Creatures with wings. Then butterflies and bats would also be subcategories of birds because they have wings. This would mean that butterflies are insect birds and bats are mammal birds. At least we could think of them that way. And crows and pigeons would then be non-insect, non-mammal birds. The question is it useful to define birds as creatures with wings? Is it useful or is it not useful? Support your answer with reason. Okay, and what this question does is to develop the ability, it contributes to the developing the ability to argue against flawed classification, and also given two classificatory systems to choose between them. Okay, so this is a more straightforward one than questions 1 and 2. So what we were looking at now in these three questions was, in the first one, defending theoretical assumptions. In the second one, the second question had to do with choosing between competing theories, competing assumptions. And the third question looks at the ability to argue against flawed classification. And all of these are central to theoretical research in science. Okay. Now, in our current courses, learning materials, classrooms, assessments, typically we don't do these kinds of activities. And if we wish to develop our students' thinking abilities associated with mathematics, the physical, biological, human science, and the humanities, it is crucial that activities of this kind find a place in the learning space for students. Okay. All right, going on to question 4. That's a long one. I'll read it out. That'll be easier for you. The concept of line in Euclidean geometry assumes that between any 2 points, no matter how close they are, there exist infinitely many points. This means that no 2 points can connect to each other. Suppose we abandon this axiom and assume that every finite line that is, a line segment, has finitely many. This means that adjacent points do exist in this geometry. It also means that the length of a line can be defined as the number of points it is made up of. Now, let us use the term gradient geometry to the theory of geometry assumes that no 2 points can be adjacent, and discrete geometry to a theory of geometry that assumes that except for the 2 end points in a line segment, every point in a line has 2 neighbors, neighbors being adjacent points, of course. In gradient geometry, there is a proof through construction to show that any line segment can be bisected. Okay? Now, is this true in discrete geometry? In discrete geometry, is it possible that every line can be bisected? Prove your answer. Okay, that's one question. Another one is a regular polygon is A, equilateral, and B, equiangular. In gradient geometry, a regular polygon can never be a circle, no matter how many sides it has. Can you prove this? And can you prove that in discrete geometry, there exist regular polygons that are circles?
See, this question aims at, this is again a somewhat unusual question. It aims at helping learners become sensitive to differences in assumptions. Assumptions are called axioms in mathematics, and how different axioms lead to different conclusions. Euclidean geometry is a geometry of flat, gradient surfaces. But there are some other geometries like curved surfaces and discrete geometries. And when you change these assumptions about the nature of surfaces and many other things, the theorems change. The theorems are what you deduce from the axioms and definitions of mathematics. This is not something that school students or college students typically understand, but it's important that they do, and then they become sensitive to how the assumptions that we make change the conclusions that we arrive at. And math is probably one of the best fields to learn this. In mathematics, the truth of a conjecture is a statement that we think is true but have not proved yet. And when it is proved, it becomes a theorem. The truth of a conjecture depends upon the definitions and axioms we choose. This is a fundamental difference between mathematics and science. So what this question does, I have a throat problem. Would Tara take over here?
Yeah, okay. So this question is an exercise in clear, precise, and rigorous reasoning. It also involves mental activities actually, that nurture the imagination and insight needed for setting up axioms, the intuition needed for conjectures and proofs, the clarity of conception and expression needed for formulating axioms, definitions, and conjectures, the rigor of reasoning for articulating proofs, actually discovering and articulating proofs, and the habit of reading and writing with utmost care, with clarity and precision, so that you get exactly what the question or the text is saying. And these outcomes, these ways of thinking, these abilities to think are a hallmark of mathematics and of analytic philosophy. Okay? I'll give you a moment to think of that.
Shall we go on to the next question? Okay.
I think we just one more question, because I think we may not have time for more than that. The next question is, a chapter in a school textbook says that microorganisms are organisms that are invisible to the naked eye. In the same chapter on other pages, you find a statement that fungi are microorganisms and mushrooms are fungi. Do you find anything strange when you put them together? If yes, how why is the textbook say? That's the question. Now, if you look at it this way, one, mushrooms are fungi. Two, fungi are microorganisms. And three, microorganisms are invisible to the naked eye. You put those together, then should we be able to see mushrooms? Should they be visible to the naked eye? No, right? But we can see mushrooms. So this question requires you to develop the sensitivity to logical contradictions, right, in a body of statements. And when a logical contradiction is found between two statements, between two or more statements, then we need the ability to revise those statements such that the contradiction is eliminated. And this is a fundamental property of all forms of rational inquiry, not just mathematics or science, but anything, whether mathematical, scientific, philosophical, humanistic, all of those.
Actually, I would like to add that this was found in an actual textbook. A student brought this to our attention. The logical contradiction is there in one of the textbooks that we saw, and it's very important for students to be able to detect them and engage with them rather than simply accepting whatever the textbook says. Okay, let's move on to the next.
Yeah, there were two more questions at least. One had to do with democracy, the other with migration. But I think we are running out of time, so we're going to skip those questions.
Okay.
Go on to, all right. Now, if you notice, all the examples we've had, all the questions we've had are such that they don't require any special content knowledge beyond class 10, right? However, the abilities that they involve are foundational to research. Now, by nurturing these thinking abilities through tasks of this kind, of the kind that we have illustrated, we are also preparing students to become future researchers. Notice also that unlike the multiple choice questions that we find in most of the entrance tests and aptitude tests and so on, which need to be answered in less than 2 minutes, these questions require you to spend a stretch of time to read the question, think through it, formulate an answer, and so on. And this would take, for each of these questions, it would take at least 15 to 20 minutes if it were in, say, an examination situation. Okay. Also, such questions require the examiner to spend a lot of time grading them, and there are, of course, other problems in addition to time, those of subjective variation in grading and so on. So the question that one would ask is it possible, let's see, is it possible to design a computer gradable format for questions that can test thinking abilities of this kind? Now, our answer is a definite yes, because we have developed and tried out what we call an EMCQ, or an enhanced multiple choice question format. Some of the characteristics of this format is that the question, a question employs 10 to 15 options. Usually you just have 3 or 4 or 5 at most. Here you can have 10, 15, 20 options. Typically requires the choice of more than one option. So you have to pick a certain number in order to get full marks. The allocation of marks for the different options could be variable. So, some of the choices might be more important than others. And there's also varying penalties for inappropriate options, for wrong options, and so on. Now, once you have something like this, it has worked for us. It does become computer graded. So it's possible. Okay, so what we've talked about so far in some sense is in response to the two questions we asked at the beginning. The two first questions. Sorry. Yeah, these two questions. How can syllabus learning materials, pedagogical strategies, assessment, and so on be changed to be aligned to these thinking abilities? That's one. And empowered by these changes, what can happen in classrooms that can help students develop these abilities? These were the two things we were trying to look at so far in the questions, the examples that we took. Now, how about the third question? If you want to develop these thinking abilities outside the school and college system, what options do you have? Do you have any options to develop them on your own? And
yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, we should say there is considerable amount of material on the internet for students to learn on their own. If you choose judiciously, of course. Internet is full of all kinds of junk, but it also has extremely valuable learning materials. If you choose judiciously, it is possible for you to learn some of these things. For example, if you are interested in discipline-specific thinking, there are courses on the web like MIT Professor Walter Levin's Introduction to Classical Mechanics, from which you can learn classical mechanics in the best possible way. There is Stanford Professor Robert Sapolsky's course on human behavioral biology. That's an extraordinary course, one of the best courses that we have ever seen in biology. There is Harvard Professor Michael Sandel's course on justice, what's the right thing to do, and University of Texas Professor Michael Starber's course, Effective Mathematical Thinking Through Mathematics. These are just 4 examples. There are many of them on the internet. All that you need is to go through those courses. You don't need the support of schools and colleges if you want to learn how to think like an academic, how to think like a mathematician, think like a biologist.
Okay, so all of those examples are for discipline-specific thinking. Now, if you're interested in thinking across disciplines, what we call transdisciplinary thinking, you will find quite some material at the ThinQ website. We just quickly show you that it's www.thinq.education. Okay, and we also offers an annual 22-week online course on inquiry and integration in education. And this course focuses on thinking and inquiry ability. Now, if you want course details, they're available at www.think.education/IIE. IIE stands for Inquiry and Integration in Education. This course is about to begin, and the deadline for application is May 1st. If you're interested, do go through the application page. Even if you're not doing the course, go ahead and take a look at all the links at that site. Okay. All right. So that was by way of our spelling out some of the thinking abilities that we have explored in our work, especially through thinking about curricula, syllabuses, and in general about learning and assessment tasks in our own teaching. One of the driving forces behind this thinking is a question that we asked ourselves about 30 years ago. When a class of students completes an undergraduate degree in any subject, say physics or math, only a very small number of them go on to higher education or careers in that subject. How would the course be useful for the rest of them? And this is probably true of BCom and BTech graduates as well. So what a good curriculum for an undergraduate program has to do is make it valuable for the large proportion of graduates who don't go on to higher studies or careers in that discipline. And the answer we arrived at through these questions was that what is important is the ability to, the thinking abilities that the particular discipline helps us to acquire, and those, particularly those abilities that are transferable across disciplines. Okay, and are of value not only in your first job but in your second and third and fourth jobs, as is required now, I guess. So I hope we've been able to convey at least some of the impact of that answer in what we have talked about. I guess that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Yeah.
We'll be happy to respond to questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you so much, sir. It was a very a wide area to actually focus into in such a small time. And I hope you're. I mean, I'm audible to you. Am I?
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a very vast area, and you basically focused on some like basic aspects towards all the thinking strategies that we could use, and also give a very good idea about how the think can actually provide us with a very ENCQ uh, uh, you know that format that we can actually use for giving our thinking abilities and using that in a better way. I hope I'm right. Yeah. So as of now, we have actually two questions. One is a bit long, like it's a bit like an essay kind of a question, but I think I can break it up for you. But before that, I can give you a very small question that has come up. Can reading enhance thinking? By Jaren Raj.
Okay. Do you want to take that question?
I guess yes, reading can, but not all kinds of reading. If you are thinking about reading the standard, typical textbooks, they present information. So a typical physics textbook will provide information and calculating skills. That may not actually encourage thinking. But if you're reading something like Einstein and Infeld's book, Evolution of Physics, that's a very different kind of book. That raises questions, that discusses the scientific methodology, that discusses justification, the kinds of things that we have been talking about. That will promote thinking. If you are reading, for example, Feynman's books, Adventures of something like Adventures of a Curious Character, that would trigger thinking. So you have to choose what you read. Some books trigger thinking, other books don't.
I hope his query has been answered in the right way. There is another question from Mr. Sheshadri. It actually goes on and on about how like the present education system has a very ancient way of teaching students about the entire concept, in a very spoon-feeding manner, and thus it does not actually imbibe the thinking capacity of the students very well. So, but there are certain NGOs that actually take part in a very positive manner in this aspect, and so his question is how can we bring that pedagogy into the school learning system, and also what are your views into it, and finally how can it be of value to the students once it is brought into the scene.
Okay. Go ahead.
See, this is not a matter of pedagogy, it's a matter of what you're aiming at. Our experience has been that most of the NGOs that do focus on thinking abilities are interested in application of thinking abilities. So, for instance, they will teach you how to use knowledge of physics to apply to various practical problems. Or they would give you knowledge of biology and then encourage you to think applicationally. How do you apply biology to various problems? What we have been focusing on is not those applicational thinking abilities, but the ability to construct knowledge the ability to think like a mathematician, not like an applied mathematician, but like a pure mathematician, like a theoretical scientist. That idea that school children and college students can actually think like mathematicians and scientists and philosophers and historians, that idea has not yet stepped into the discourse of education yet. That's our impression. We may be wrong, but that's our impression. We have not seen that happening in the field yet, but it is indeed feasible. We have tried it out. And by the time, in about something like 2 or 3 years, we find that students begin to think like researchers. Even if they are not doing research, they can think like researchers fairly quickly. So it's a matter of what we aim at rather than the pedagogy, not how we teach, but what we teach.
I hope his query has been answered rightly. We have another question from Mary and Sebastian, asking how do we develop thinking skills from school age?
Sarah, you want to address that question because you have tried out this
Yes,
second grade, sixth grade.
Right. So I've tried it out in second grade. It really involves designing the right kind of activities and questions that children would be interested in, and that will set them thinking. So something as I'll give you one very quick example. Take a story and change it. Take a story that they are familiar with, change it and ask them how it has changed and whether the change is for the good or the bad. And they start thinking. I mean, it's a very, just, it might look like a trivial example, but it has wonderful effects. Okay, so it is possible to get children to start thinking right from, say, first grade or even before. And an important part of that is to, when they ask questions, why this and why that, not to shut them up, to let them think about it, let them ask questions, let them dig for themselves, let them figure out, and not tell them that they are wrong, but involve them in making decisions, in answering questions, learn with them. There's various ways of getting even young children to start thinking and developing their thinking.
Actually, that example that you have about seeds and stones is something that you can do in second grade. Do you want to briefly mention that?
Okay. Amala, do we have the time for that?
Yeah, ma'am. No, we can take around 15 minutes of time is there.
Okay. All right. So one of the things that I've seen work really well in the second grade class is you give them, let's say, a group of them. If you divide them into groups, give them a few seeds and a few stones, which are roughly the same size, same color, and tell them, all right, as a group, divide them into these two groups. I mean, divide them just as when you have Lego blocks, red ones or any toy, red ones and blue ones, you divide them into the two groups by color. Like that, divide this bunch of seeds and stones into two groups. You don't tell them what they are. And then give each group a name. Okay, this is something I've done in class, and when the children came back in groups, I asked them what the two things were, and one group said they are rocks and beads. The second group said, no, they're not rocks and beads, they are stones and seeds. And then the class had a discussion. These are 7-year-olds, mind you, had a discussion about whether they were rocks or stones, which one should we take? And they said, no, rocks are big, stones are small. So, and they listed a whole lot of properties that would identify stones versus rocks. And then seeds and beads. Why seeds? Why not beads? The whole class said, because beads are things that people make, whereas seeds are things that you find. Seeds are part of nature. They're not man-made. So they said, all right, they accept the division into seeds and stones. So then I asked them what they would do, how they would identify something that I gave them that was actually a seed but looked very much like a stone, had all the properties that they had listed for stones. And one of them said, he asked me for one of the pieces and said, he pointed to something there and said, there is this point where the seed is attached to the plant. And he didn't have the term germination point or anything of that kind. But he said, now if that point is there, it means it's a seed. Now, this got the children thinking. This was an activity that just had a lot of thinking happening. There are plenty of activities of that kind that can develop thinking abilities in young children. It's just an example.
By that you mean it is a constructive thinking paradigm entirely. Okay. I think that question has been answered. Thank you, ma'am. And we have another question. Basically, I'm a psychologist and lecturer, but what advice you will have to share for our teachers? What changes we need to make in our teaching methodology? By Syed Sheikh.
I'm sorry, I'm not. Can you say that again? I didn't quite understand.
The question is the person who has prompted the question is a psychologist and a lecturer. So he is asking what advice you have to share to the teachers, and in the range of what changes can they make in their teaching methodology to make it better.
I think one of the answers would be, before thinking about teaching methodology, you have to think about what it is that you want children to learn. So, I mean, when I say children, I mean at any level, say whether in school or college, undergraduate or graduate, whatever. You have to decide, you have to start by specifying what you want the class or the year, whatever, to be able to do, to be able to learn, understand by the end of that course. Unless you start from the goals of the course, you're not going to be able to decide on just on pedagogy. And just changing pedagogy will not be enough.
So let me give an example. If you're thinking about psychology at the college level, psychology is a very good subject for teaching students experimental inquiry, scientific experiments. Now, students are not typically taught how to design experiments. Science students, for example, go to the lab and do experiments. Nobody learns how to design experiments. Nobody learns how to come up with a hypothesis and test a hypothesis. Psychology is extremely good for experimental inquiry. That means designing experiments. So here's a case. This is not psychology. Suppose you find that you plant some seeds of chilies which are very spicy, and then you find that when they grow, the chilies that they produce are not spicy at all. What could possibly be the hypothesis, causal hypothesis, to explain why the chilies are not hot? One could say it's because they receive inadequate sunlight. One could say they receive inadequate water, or it could be some combination. Now, ask students to design an experiment to choose between these hypotheses. Take another case. Suppose your grandmother tells you that drinking tulsi tea will cure common cold. All right? Design an experiment to test this hypothesis. Now, in order to do this, in order to learn how to design such experiments, you will have to learn the distinction between correlations and causes. So notice that understanding the distinction between correlations and causes is now you are getting into inquiry abilities and inquiry concepts. So any subject can be used to teach these inquiry abilities rather than simply content knowledge. And when you do that, you're going beyond your subject to these transdisciplinary inquiry abilities that cut across disciplinary boundaries.
Okay, so that was a gist of it. And thank you for the question and the answer as well. We have another question from Ajay Krishnan Ji asking what kind of relationship exists between rationality, logic, scientific temper, and critical thinking? How do we harmoniously blend this concept?
That's
That's for a whole course, actually.
Yes, it's a big one.
Yeah,
Yes.
it'll take at least an hour to respond to that question. So let me see if I can do that in a couple of minutes.
We can give a small pill-sized answer if it is at all possible.
Yeah.
I hope.
Well, we have been talking about reasoning. The study of reasoning is logic. And the first thing we have to do is to understand that there are different systems of logic. I'm not going to go into these details now. So that is the relation between reasoning and logic. As for rationality rests on two fundamental principles. And one principle is that of logical consequence, which says if you accept a set of premises, you must also accept the logical consequences from these premises. And the other principle is you must not accept two propositions which are logically contradictory. You must not accept a combination of two propositions that are logically contradictory at the same time. That's all there is in rationality. The rest are application of these two principles. Rational temper, in fact, did you say rational temper or scientific temper?
Scientific temper.
Okay. This was an idea that Nehru had long ago. We would like to expand that notion of scientific temper to rational temper because it also applies to mathematics, which is not a science, philosophy, which is not a science. So we will call it rational temper. And rational temper includes these two principles of rationality that I mentioned and a few other things. Again, we are not going to go into the details. We don't have the time. But essentially, just about everything that we said today is a matter of rational temper. Sarah, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in addition to the two pillars of rationality and reasoning based on logic, rational temper also has as a foundation the need for not accepting things blindly, but asking for evidence, questioning things, doubting things, doubting not just what somebody else says, but doubting ourselves as well, and not accepting things just because they come from authority and so on. So doubting, questioning, asking for evidence, asking for reasons, that would also be part of the scientific temper. And all of these put together go into critical thinking. So that's what ties all four of them together.
It's an amazing blend. In the end, the critical thinking actually bears the entire weight of it. I think that answer is answered. That question is answered. Sorry. Do we need to take another question, ma'am, or we can just conclude the session?
That's up to you.
Yeah. No, there were two questions. I hope it is a simple one, but since it is already 5 minutes to the close, I think we'll give you the questions and then you can get back to them. Just as so. Thank you so much, sir and ma'am. Like the questions and the entire crux of the whole content that we had today actually made a fairly good picture to a start, that we can actually have different sorts of thinking abilities into it, but then we can actually build on it and then go for more complex thinking variations. And the idea was more or less I think many of them had so many questions from all sides, so they actually wanted to give whole picture to the entire content that was put today. And I hope all the questions they actually got to answer. I mean, you actually got to answer was up to your expectations, I hope. So so we can conclude.
Okay, thank you so much, Amala. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the entire team. And thank you for all those who joined us to
Yes,
Yes.
join the session.
yes, yes. Thank
Thank
you so much. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your patience and for the